All right, I'm going to draw our parallelograms PQRF. So again, reminder that you need to make sure when you label them, it doesn't matter where you put P, but they have to go in consecutive order, either clockwise or counterclockwise. Make sure you don't jump around. Okay, so P is 7, -1. Q is 3, 6. R is -1, -1. And S is 3, -8. So how should we start? What's a good way to start? Daniel? Think. Okay, tell me why. Okay, what if they are? What if they are? Okay, so we're going to check if it's a what? All right, so first of all, let's just figure out if it's even a parallelogram. If the first pair of sides that you find the slopes of are not the same, then it's probably not a parallelogram. But you want to make sure you didn't just like do a calculation wrong or subtract wrong or, you know, set up the vertices wrong or something. All right, so you said PQ and SR. I'm going to do it over here where I can look at it. Slopes, segment PQ's slope is going to be 6 plus 1. Remember, y's on top. 7 over -4. And then the side that should be parallel to it is SR. The slope of SR is -8 plus 1 and 3 plus 1, -7 over 4. Okay, so what does that tell us? Sam, what does that tell us? That they're parallel. Okay, so what's wrong with just stopping there and saying it's a parallelogram? Peter? What is because then you get into one way to show parallelogram is to show those sides that are parallel are also congruent. But why do you have to do a second calculation? Why isn't it sufficient to just do the one pair of sides? Not sure. You want to phone a friend? Yeah. Emmett, why is it not sufficient to do just one pair of sides? Okay, what kind of quadrilateral has only one and only one pair of parallel sides? I mean, a trapezoid. So you want to make sure that it's not actually a trapezoid, in which case it would not be a parallelogram. After we kind of focus on the special parallelograms here, we're also going to talk about trapezoids and kites, and then we'll do more coordinate geometry, figuring out what the shape is, including trapezoids and kites. Okay, so we need to make sure we determine if it's a parallelogram, and we're on our way, but we have not finished. Okay, so the other sides. So slopes for segment PS and segment QR. All right, so PS is -8 plus 1 and 3 minus 7. So -7 over -4 is 7/4. And then for QR, 6 plus 1 and 3 plus 1, 7/4. Okay, Riley, what do we know? Okay, so both pairs of opposite sides are parallel. So what does that tell you? Okay, we know it's a parallelogram now, so those are both parallel. There's something else that we know. What else do we know? Somebody who hasn't talked to me yet today. What else do we know? Okay, we know it's a parallelogram because it's a quad with 2 pairs of parallel sides. That's a definition, right? So we just check that it is parallelogram. Meg? Now that you know it's parallelogram, you know that everything about that, like all the properties parallelograms apply to it, right? So that's true. I don't think you know that because you did slopes, right? You didn't do distances. So you determined it's a parallelogram. So all we know so far that we've written down is that we know opposite sides are parallel. Okay. Andrew? Okay. It's not a rectangle. Say that again, because. Okay. So remember a good reason to start with 4 slopes is because not only will it tell you if it's a parallelogram, it'll also tell you if it has right angles, which if they're perpendicular sides at all the corners and all the vertices, then it'll be a rectangle. So this one is not a rectangle. Because the slopes are not opposite reciprocals. So not perpendicular. Okay, and then you said it's also not a square. How do you know it's not a square? A square has what? Yeah, a square is a rectangle, right? So if it's not a rectangle, it can't be a square. It's not a rhombus, it can't be a square. In order to be a square, it has to be both a rectangle and a rhombus. Okay, also not a square. Because not a rectangle. Okay, so what we know so far is that it's not a square, it's not a rectangle, but it is a parallelogram. So we need to know if it's a rhombus, because it might just be a parallelogram, but we need to list everything that's true about it. So Frankie, what's a good way to figure out if it's a rhombus? How many times? 4 times? Okay, you get started with that, knock yourself out. I'm gonna do something different. What's a different thing you can do? Brooke, what's another way to determine if that's a rhombus? Okay, so Frankie, distance is fine, but you don't have to do it 4 sides, 4 times. Do you know why not? No, that won't tell you if it's a rhombus. The distance on 2 diagonals would actually tell you if it's a rectangle. Okay, that's what Brooke said. We're going to do slope of the diagonals to see if it's perpendicular. But my question to you was, you said you want to do distance, or you were thinking to do distance. I'm okay with you doing distance, but I really don't want you to waste too much time. Why don't you have to do all 4 distances? We're in. Okay, and you already know what? There's kind of something that you're thinking in your head, but you aren't really telling me. Yeah. Okay, so we already know what about the opposite sides? We already know what? Well, they're parallel, but they're also what? Congruent. Okay, so Frankie, since we already know those are the same and those are the same, you really don't have to check all 4 distances, because whatever this one is, that's the same as that one, right? We know it's a parallelogram. Whatever this one is, it's the same as that one. What we need to know is, are those 2 pairs of numbers actually equal? So we know we have 2 pairs of congruent sides that are opposite each other. We just need to check 2 consecutive sides. So if you want to do distance, that's fine. That's checking the definition, right? The definition is that all sides are going to be congruent in your parallelogram. So if you want to do distance, just do it 2 times and make sure you're picking consecutive sides. Okay, another option for rhombus, which most people probably prefer, is doing slope on the diagonals to determine if the diagonals are perpendicular. Okay, you've got to know it's a parallelogram first, though. perpendicular diagonals will tell you, on a parallelogram, will tell you it's a rhombus. Okay, so Madeline, what are our diagonals? What segments are the diagonals? PR and SQ. Okay, so PR would be -1 + 1 and 7 + 1, which is 0/8. SQ is 6 + 8 over 3 - 3, which is 14/0. Okay, someone who is not in Algebra 2 currently, decipher that for me. What does that tell you? Break the code here. What does that tell you? Riley? Good. So remember, 0 divided by anything is going to be 0, but it is not possible to divide by 0. So that will be an undefined value. Now, what does that tell you about the lines, about the segments? What does that tell you about the segments? Scott? Why? Which one is horizontal? Yes. So this is a horizontal line, and this one is a vertical line. So of course, they're going to be perpendicular. And remember that like the opposite reciprocal thing is, they'll typically say like non-vertical lines are perpendicular if and only if their slopes are opposite reciprocals, because vertical lines don't have a slope. So you know that if lines are vertical, they're perpendicular to horizontal ones. But just a reminder that when you get 0 on top, it's equal to 0. And when you get 0 on the bottom, it's undefined. Okay, so that tells us that these are actually perpendicular. So PQRS is a rhombus. All right, so our answer there is going to be yes, it's a parallelogram. Yes, it's a rhombus. But it's not a rectangle and not a square. Okay, now again, that's not the only way to do the problem. You can prove it's a parallelogram however you would like, but depending on how you prove it, you may not be able to determine rectangle or rhombus from the calculations. So let's see, if you do 4 distances on the sides to start, that'll tell you if it's a parallelogram, and it would also tell you if it's a rhombus. Okay, so if you really love distance formula, do 4 distances to start. So, you know, you can do the quick way of showing the diagonals have a share a midpoint, and that will tell you it's a parallelogram, but you're still going to have to do other things to figure out the rectangle rhombus. So you have options. I just think this might be the easiest way to start because at least it right away tells you if it's a parallelogram or not. Okay, and again, we're going to mix in trapezoids and kites later on once we talk about them specifically.